hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5, North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Let's get right to it. They are still trying to pin those gas attacks in Syria on Bashar al-Assad. Okay, here is the problem with that. They're really not very convincing, and they're asking you to simply take their word for it as people hurl accusations at him. That's one of the problems. You may recall that this started a while back, in 2012, the civil war in Syria having been going on for some time, when this is what occurred with the American President Barack Obama.
I have, at this point, not ordered military engagement in the situation, but the point that you made about chemical and biological weapons is critical. That's an issue that doesn't just concern Syria. It concerns our close allies in the region, including Israel. It concerns us. We cannot have a situation where chemical or biological weapons are falling into the hands of the wrong people. We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
It's somehow under its state.
In a situation this this volatile, I wouldn't say that I am absolutely confident. What I'm saying is we're monitoring that situation very carefully. We have put together a range of contingency plans. We have communicated in no uncertain terms with every player in the region that that's a red line for us, and that there would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons front, or the use of chemical weapons. That would change my calculations significantly.
What I want you to hear in what he said, because it's very easy to criticize Barack Hussein Obama. He was a lousy president. He was even worse in foreign policy. However, what he said, if you stick exactly to what he said, he didn't indicate that he believed that the Bashar al-Assad government was the only ones capable of deploying gas attacks, deploying sarin gas or any other type of gas to attack anyone in the region. He didn't call out anyone. He just said, if we see that, that's a red line. And of course, he came under criticism because of the attack that happened in 2013 after he did this, and he took no action. How about the possibility, as much as it pains me to even admit it, that Barack Obama took no action because, one, either he couldn't tell for certain who actually used the gas. Everyone says, or wants to say, the official story, as they put it, is that al-Hassad used the gas on his own people. That's the official story. I don't know that Barack Obama believed that. Instead of saying that, which would have been very much going against the grain, and that's not the type of person that Barack Obama was in international affairs, he just went ahead and denied that there ever was a red line. The way the red line was construed by the international, not just the U.S. media, was that if it was going to happen, it needed to be pretty much a given that al-Hassad had done it. Here's the problem with that. Al-Hassad is on record denying that it ever occurred. This is what he said about the attack in 2013, the attack that occurred in 2013, to CBS News.
The daily ebb and flow of war in Syria. Rebels fighting to overthrow the government, targeting an army base located on a mountaintop in Latakia province. Projectile fire towards opposition forces who respond with volleys of missiles, mortars, rockets, tank fire and guns of many sizes and ages. International discussions over the military intervention seeming to have little effect on the front line. President Assad again denying his forces were responsible for the alleged chemical weapon attack, this time talking to CBS News.
In the area where they said the government used chemical weapons, we only had video and we only have pictures and allegations. We're not there.
It's his first TV interview since President Obama asked US Congress for a limited strike, Assad disputing what's been claimed.
It's not about confidence, it's about evidence. The Russians have completely opposite evidence that the missiles were thrown from area where the rebels control.
Asking the US to produce the evidence it says it has.
Kerry doesn't have. No one in your administration has. If they had it, they would have presented it to you.
More than 100,000 people have died so far in the fighting in the 2.5-year uprising. Veiled threats from President Assad, who assures the US broadcaster that there will be many more casualties if America intervenes.
You should expect everything, not necessarily through the government. It's not only the governments are not the only player in this region. You have different parties, you have different factions, you have different ideology. You have everything in this region now. So you have to expect that.
Two things out of that. I didn't do it. They don't have any evidence because if they did, they would present it. Russia has evidence to the contrary. Now we know how, because of everything Russia here in the United States, how saying that Russia says or does anything is going to be received. Oh, the Russians, of course, are lying. But let me ask you this. Do you believe the U.S. intelligence community nowadays? These are the same guys who actually have been shown through the evidence in the Mueller investigation as having more to do with trying to undermine democracy than Vladimir Putin on his best day. So, if the evidence is simply the opinion of the U.S. intelligence community, I got a problem with that, don't you? Oh, by the way, Carla Del Ponte, who is a chief investigator or a former prosecutor for UN tribunals, and she investigated war crimes in the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, she had this to say regarding the 2013 gas attacks in Syria.
During our investigation for crimes against humanity and war crimes, we collect some witness testimony that made to appear that some chemical weapons were used, in particular nervine gas. And what appeared to our investigation that was used by the opponents, by the rebels, and we have no indication at all that the government, the authority of the Syrian government, have used chemical weapons.
No evidence at all that the Syrian government was the one that used the chemical weapons that were deployed against civilians in 2013. That's the UN investigation. Now, we know the UN went back and cleaned up its story. I'm not disagreeing with that. There is a narrative here that says we must rid the world of Syria's currently constituted government. That is the international narrative, and I don't think it's an accurate narrative. When I say accurate, I don't think this guy's done what they're accusing him of doing. There is no. Remember this attack that happened now, and more than one of the attacks that have happened since that 2013 attack have occurred after they took all of his chemical weaponry. They shipped it out of the country. He didn't fight against it. He said, "Here, take it." And they did take it. And they accounted for everything that they took. And the attacks keep happening. He keeps saying, "I didn't do it." You already have a UN investigator who was on the ground talking to people who were witnesses and saying, "That ain't where it came from. It didn't come from the government. It came from these guys." The Russians are saying the same thing. The only people who are saying that this came from Assad are people who present no evidence of same. That includes Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. I am not so in the tank for anybody that when I start seeing the evidence and something stinks, the Syrian government is still in place because the Syrian people want it in place. This civil war, which has gone on, oh my gosh, it's gone on for 8+ years now, I believe. This is ridiculous. It was at one time a quote unquote free Syrian army against al-Hassad, and you had some options there. But this was back in the days of Arab Spring and all this other stuff. You ended up with the quote-unquote moderate Syrians who simply had a legitimate beef with al-Hassad to every flavor of al-Qaeda and ISIS and radical in the region. And that's who's there now. That's who's fighting against the Syrian government now. Now, we know the reputation of ISIS and al-Qaeda. No one is more brutal, even to Muslims, than these guys. They will go after anyone, and have. Do you really think that these guys, you can see them on tape, standing over enemies that they've killed, cutting out their internal organs and taking a bite on camera? Do you really think that these guys would not use chemical weapons? Well, why are you defending Bashir al-Assad? I'm not defending Bashir al-Assad. There is no evidence. There is simply an accusation. Let me tell you what. There is less evidence that Bashir al-Assad gassed his own people than there is evidence that the cops in Sacramento, quote unquote, murdered Stephon Clark. You got air. You actually have people coming out who are on the ground in the line of fire saying the government did not do this. Please explain to me why you're trying to listen to anything else. Oh, because CNN says so. Because the BBC says so. There is a conspiracy. I don't say that lightly. Because if you go talk to the Syrian people, Syria under Bashir al-Assad is probably the least oppressive Arab government in the region. They have different rules where women can move with greater freedom in society. They're not as regimented. Education is not restricted from them. This is a different Arab country in the region from the Saudi Arabias, from Jordan even, from all these. This is different. There is a reason why they want to go down, why someone wants them to go down. And the only thing that is there to replace al-Hassad, if and when he is removed, is whatever flavor of radical Islamist in that part of the world. If you remove Bashar al-Assad, you are basically installing radical Islamists. You're doing a Libya 2.0, where you took out someone that you said was bad, and now you have a country that is governable? Because you have an open slave trade going on in Libya, in case you've forgotten. Do you think Syria would be different? Because the same people who are running Libya, those same characters, those same ideologies, would be in charge of Syria if Syria were to fall. Understand this. When you heard about this attack within the last day, remember that the red line that Barack Obama talked about, we don't know who crossed it. Remember that the evidence that Syria has done this, the UN did not find it initially. They came up with a report well after the fact, and the evidence is still sketchy at best. This is tribal knowledge. It must be, because we don't like Bashar al-Assad and he must go. He is doing this to his people. I don't think it's true. And the interesting thing about the way globalists operate, innuendo, repeated by the right people, is always damning evidence. And here we go again. You've taken all of the chemical weapons out of the hands of the Syrian government. Another gas attack occurs, and you're ready to blame again the Syrian government when you couldn't find evidence that they had done it in 2013 or 2016 or 2000. There's nothing. And if they do this, while you're worried about Stormy Daniels, while you're worried about whoever else Trump is doing, while you're worried about what Mueller can't find, giving somebody 30 days for something out of a $10 million investigation, while you're worried about all this, this is serious geopolitics going on right there in that region that has far-reaching effects that go all the way back to here. If Syria goes into the hands of the radical Islamists, then Israel is in great danger. If Israel comes under great danger, we are in great danger. The whole region is now up for grabs. And someone wants this so bad that with no evidence, and now without even any verifiable weaponry to mask such an attack, someone is still trying to pin gas attacks on Syria, on the Syrian government. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, talkamericaradio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in AmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Now, I want to ask a question. Is the progressive position now that people who are mentally ill can't have guns, but military transsexuals, if you make it into the military, you can? That's my question. Here's why. You may remember back in July of last year, we had this controversy surrounding President Trump.
President Trump making military policy via Twitter. Today, suddenly announcing the United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military, sparking instant criticism from Democrats and Republicans.
I believe that is an awful decision. I served on active duty in the military, and I can tell you, we don't care about gender orientation or identity or who you love.
Senator John McCain, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, also saying there is no reason to force service members who are able to fight, train, and deploy to leave the military regardless of their gender identity. But some lawmakers agree with the decision, citing Trump's reasoning that the military cannot be burdened with the tremendous medical costs and disruption that transgender in the military would entail.
We need to spend every defense dollar where we need to, and this has been a real concern.
A 2016 RAND study concluded gender transition healthcare coverage for transgender military members would increase the Defense Department's healthcare costs by as much as $8.4 million, a tiny fraction of the Pentagon's overall $49.3 billion healthcare expenditures.
This isn't just about healthcare. This, according to Donald Trump's tweets, is about not allowing transgender people to serve at all.
That same RAND study put the number of transgender service members at between 13 and 6,600. Two unanswered questions. Under President Trump's ban, will those already serving be forced out? And what about Defense Secretary James Mattis, who just last month ordered a 6-month delay so DOD could study the issue further? The Pentagon will not say if Mattis agreed with the sudden Trump announcement.
The decision is based on a military decision. It's not meant to be anything more than that.
Let's back up on that a little bit, shall we? CNN reported back in July of 2017, President Donald Trump announced he plans to reinstate a reinstate. Oh, you mean there been one there before? Okay. Reinstate a ban on transgender individuals from serving in any capacity in the U.S. Armed Services. The decision reversed the policy initially approved by the Defense Department under Barack Obama, which was still under review because he didn't come out with it until 2016. Barack Obama is a homosexual. I know how people feel when I say that. It doesn't change anything. All you gotta do is ask around Chicago. Why it took him until the last year of his presidency, beside the fact that he knew he didn't have to face the voters again, but this wasn't even fully implemented policy, not officially, but you had transgenders coming in. Now, for those who don't get it, this is not the policy of the U.S. military is not to allow transgender individuals to serve. This was a policy change that was still under review, and the Obama administration, being as not very concerned about rules it disliked anyway, pushed ahead and said, let's go ahead and put them in. But this was not policy. This was not in accordance with regulatory documentation in the military. Now, you have the guy come on and said, I served in the military and we didn't care about these things. I served in the military and we darn sure did care about whether or not you were a guy who wanted to be a girl. We cared about that stuff. We cared about guys who wanted to be with guys. We cared about that stuff. Now, I don't know what happens once you get to Washington, D.C. and they brainwash you, but that ain't the way it went down when I was in the military. That's not the way it went down with the military people I speak with. This is not something about which they do not care. It is something about which they do not get to have a choice. Other people speak for them. Anyway, that announcement was made in July. In October, a federal judge weighed in and said, Mr. Trump, you need to slow your roll.
A U.S. federal judge has temporarily blocked President Donald Trump from banning transgender people from serving in the military. The judge overruled the president's directive, saying it was not genuinely based on legitimate concerns regarding military effectiveness or budget constraints. It was in August that Trump announced his decision to order the military not to accept transgender recruits, reversing former President Barack Obama's policy and halting years of trying to eliminate barriers to military service based on sexual orientation. The judge's ruling is being seen as a victory to transgender service members who had accused the president of violating their constitutional rights. Trump's action had appealed to his hardline conservative supporters.
Actually, it appealed to the American people, and that's why they voted for him, but that's another issue. But a judge said nah, it's too big, too broad, can't just do that. Donald Trump did something after that which really his opponents really despise. They don't like it. What they are expecting, progressives are expecting conservatives and those who lean right to do, once the court speaks, it's all over. Well, that's the capitulation that, say, John Boehner made regarding Obamacare. It's the law of the land. Well, it's amazing how that law of the land has now been made almost inert because somebody pushed back and told the courts, really don't care what you say. And now it's gone, and the courts can't really do anything about it. They can't save it. But Donald Trump said, fine, you don't like that? Let me go back and think about this, and I'll be back. That's what he did with the travel ban. That's why the Supreme Court let it go forward. And he did that with this ban as well.
Donald Trump once again moving to bar transgender troops from serving in the U.S. military. But this new ban comes with some exceptions. With that, let's bring in Megan Roberts, who has more on this. So how different is this ban, Megan, from the one that was announced by Trump last year?
Well, Michael, Trump is scaling back. So instead of saying that nobody who is transgender can serve in the military, he's saying that some can. There are a few exceptions, but that others cannot. Specifically, those exceptions are currently serving members of the military who were diagnosed with gender dysphoria after June of 2016. That is when the Obama administration's policy on transgender people serving in the military came into effect. So after June of 2016, anybody who is transgender, who is serving in the military and diagnosed with gender dysphoria can continue to serve. Everyone else cannot. And the reason the White House is saying for this ban is because those people, those transgender people, present a risk to military effectiveness. So that's the reason given. Now, this is coming after recommendations from the Defense Secretary, and this is also coming after that blanket ban that Trump announced last year, sparking protests like this. It had several legal challenges, that blanket ban. So now he's saying some can, some cannot. The biggest question is when and how this will take effect. Probably it will face legal challenges as the previous ban did. We also know that the Pentagon and some other agencies were given some discretion in this new ban that Trump is proposing. So exactly when and how it will be applied is still yet to be seen, Michael.
Still yet to be seen, but what about the reaction? What are we hearing so far on this new initiative from Trump?
Well, certainly there was swift reaction, and a lot of people condemning this ban as well as the last. There was swift reaction to that. People saying it's discriminatory. In fact, we've already heard from at least one serving member of the military, a transgender woman, who is condemning this ban. Let's hear what she had to say.
I've been in the Army for 13 years with deployments to every combat zone of my generation. I'm currently serving as a company commander. And every other service member who's trans in the military has their own story, their own hardships, and their own service to our nation. And before kicking anyone out or saying that we couldn't serve, you have to realize that we're already serving, we have been serving, and we're just as qualified as anyone else.
Now, we're also hearing from politicians on this ban, specifically from a lot of Democrats, including the House Minority Leader, Nancy Pelosi. Let's bring up a tweet from her. She's saying that no one with the strength and bravery to serve in the U.S. military should be turned away because of who they are. She called this a hateful ban, purpose-built to humiliate transgender members of the military who serve with honor and dignity. We heard from other Democrats saying that the transgender military members deserve better. They say this is discrimination and that the ban runs counter to the American values that the American military is supposed to protect. As for the number of people who this could affect, it's unclear, but we do know that between 4,000 and 10,000 active duty and reserve service members are believed to be transgender.
The American military is supposed to protect the values that if you don't like how God made you, be someone else. They haven't protected that until June of 2016, when the policy of Barack Obama, which was still under review, was put forward. It was not final policy. And from 1776 until 2016, that was not anything resembling a value that the United States military defended. But these were Canadians, by the way. That was a CBC. That was their report from 24 March of this year. So are you getting this? Well, despite all that drama, the ban is back. And it's just a little bit limited. So we're saying that it's okay. People want it to be okay for transgender people to serve. But you talked about policy. Did you know that according to the Military Medical Standards for Enlistment and Commission, this is policy. Any history of current psychosexual conditions, including but not limited to transsexualism, that's those transgender folks, exhibitionism, transvestism, voyeurism, and other paraphilias are disqualifying. That's the policy. Please explain to me how these psychosexual conditions, which have always been on the books as disqualifying, all of a sudden, because another homosexual says that they shouldn't be there, that now you do that. I think it's fascinating. I think it's bad. But you know the other thing? Gender dysphoria is the other word for transsexualism or transgender. And that is something that's actually listed in the DSM-5 as a diagnosable and treatable mental illness. Why do I bring that up? Well, you may remember back last year, Donald Trump signed something into law regarding guns that really made people a little bit upset.
An Obama-era rule on gun background checks was officially overturned on Tuesday. As expected, President Donald Trump signed a bill that had already passed both houses of Congress. At the end of his term, former President Barack Obama mandated the Social Security Administration hand the FBI info on any person with a documented mental health issue who can't manage their disability benefits without a representative. The Obama administration predicted the rule would affect roughly 75,000 people. Supporters argued it kept some with serious mental health issues from buying guns. But opponents argued the rule was too broad and overestimated the risk to the public. To be clear, studies have found having a mental illness doesn't increase a person's chances of using a gun violently and only slightly increases the risk of a gun-related suicide.
So, if you are crazy, if you are someone with a diagnosed mental deficiency, the FBI needs to watch you to make sure if you try to go get a gun that you can't have one. That's the way the progressives want to play that. But transsexualism is something that's listed in the DSM-5. For those who do not know what the DSM-5 is, it is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is the handbook used by healthcare professionals in the U.S. and much of the world as the authoritative guide to the diagnosis of mental disorders, and gender dysphoria is listed in there. What is gender dysphoria? Involves a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which he or she or they identify. People with gender dysphoria may be very uncomfortable with the gender they were assigned, sometimes described as being uncomfortable with their body, particularly developing during puberty, or being uncomfortable with the expected roles of their assigned gender. People with gender dysphoria may often experience significant distress and or problems functioning associated with this conflict between the way they feel and think of themselves, referred to as experienced or expressed gender, and their gender, their physical or assigned gender. They don't want to be what God made them. And there is a criteria of diagnosis. There is treatment prescribed for this. Are you getting this? So here is my question. You don't want, and Donald Trump, bless his heart, is not in a consistent place on this whole thing, because he did sign into law something that said we're not going to basically put everybody who's assigned some type of mental illness in a database so that you can't have a gun. But at the same time, he is on camera speaking to people in the Oval Office, or wherever they were, saying that, well, you know what, maybe we need to take guns from crazy people and let due process come second. So, I'm not comfortable with that. And nobody who likes freedom should be comfortable with that, but that's where he is. But here is my question. So I'm taking the president out of this. I'm putting this back on on progressives because there's a conflict in your position. This thing does not align. You don't think people with a mental illness should be able to have rifles or even guns in particular. They shouldn't have guns, right? Right. Okay. But let me see. You want transgender people in the military. And transgenderism is gender dysphoria, which is a listed mental disorder in the DSM-5. So let me get this straight. You do not want the mentally ill to have access to an AR-15 or a Glock or anything like that, but you want mentally ill people to have access to military combat armament. How does that work? How does that work? And when you figure it out, you get back to me. Your position is ridiculous. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio. Freedom in America Radio.com, and WLBB News Talk, 1330 on the AM dial and 106.3 on the FM dial. Let's wind up the first hour of the show with this topic. You realize that the only thing that you hear more often among the people of color in this country regarding the current president than Trump Russia or Stormy Daniels is how racist Donald Trump is. It is the most ridiculous statement that anybody can make about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things you can say about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is nobody's idea of a perfect human being. He doesn't even think he's a perfect human being. He said so. But of all the things you want to say about Donald Trump, calling him racist is laughable. I know what's going to be said. What about the Central Park Five? What about them? That's called bad police work. He believed what the police said. They were even convicted. So that's Donald Trump's fault that they were convicted? It's Donald Trump's fault that the police did shoddy work and didn't identify the one guy who was responsible instead of getting on these five guys. It was a horrific crime. A woman who didn't even weigh 100 pounds was assaulted, raped, and sodomized in Central Park. It was horrific. And if you're somebody who has attachments to the city of New York as Donald Trump does, you don't want that type of stuff going on in your city. And whoever is responsible, you want to see them dealt with. But he took out a full page in the... Yeah, okay, yeah. Anyway. That doesn't make him racist. That makes the cops wrong. That was a law enforcement blunder. It was corrected, but not after 5 people who should not have been convicted were. That doesn't make Trump racist. Well, he was sued for housing discrimination in New York City. I ask this question all the time. You find people back in the 60s through the 80s who were large landholders, holding multiple buildings and things of that nature in New York City who were not sued for housing discrimination. Because the one thing that they never get to is people who were of quote-unquote lower income and of color in New York City had a frighteningly bad tendency to not pay their rent. And therefore, why would you want... Well, you can't blanket people like that. You know what? When you are looking at multiple units in the hundreds, maybe in the thousands, and you start seeing who pays their rent and who does not, and you start seeing a common thread among those who don't pay their rent, save that we're not going to make blanket statements for somebody else. Because when you're in business, you make blanket assumptions all the time. And if you are a landlord, that is your business. My business is to provide housing to people who will pay me. Donald Trump and his father found themselves in a situation where they were able to identify folks who didn't consistently pay them, and they didn't want to rent to people who didn't pay them. And they got sued. And they settled. The whole idea of a settlement is nobody admits guilt. So guess what? They're not guilty. And now you want to take that with all the awards Donald Trump has won, all the hip-hop and rap artists that he has hobnobbed with, what other blacks, prominent blacks have been in his company, have never had anything negative to say about him. Nobody said Donald Trump was a racist until he ran for president, not as a Democrat. And how dare he win? But the things he says, I really don't give a rat's behind about the things he says when I have a body of work to look at. Because you are what you do. You're only what you say. The only thing that occurs is what you say. So, for example, Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, and I'm going to be full disclosure. I'm not a Tim Scott fan. I'm not against him, but I'm not a Tim Scott fan. He's a little bit too close to social justice warrior for my concerns. He's a little bit too close to what are we going to do about white supremacy for my taste. That's just me. Other people are very fond of him, and I don't begrudge them that. I don't think he's anything near a bad guy. But after Charlottesville, well, let me let you tell the story. Let him tell the story about his reaction to Donald Trump's remarks.
I go back to a specific incident, the Charlottesville situation, where I had some very harsh comments about the president, and I was very candid about my displeasure and how I found some of his comments to be indefensible. He invited me into the Oval Office after my criticism, and I found something quite surprising happening in that Oval Office. He said, "We're not on the same page on the history of race relations in this country. Help me find a way forward." So I started talking about legislative remedies that would help poor kids from poor communities like the ones I grew up in. It's called Investing in Opportunity Act, and he said that he was interested in the legislation. Long story short, he supported the legislation, got that bill passed into law, and every state is now looking at ways to create opportunity zones. So yes, the rhetoric cannot be helpful. It can be indefensible at times. But the challenge that I laid on the president's desk was to help me find a path forward. And legislatively, you have to concede that that legislation, as well as now record low unemployment in communities of color, are helpful targets from a public policy standpoint. But we still have to wrestle with the rhetoric that can sometimes be hurtful.
I think that's a really valuable story.
It is a valuable story. And one thing it tells me is that Tim Scott hasn't learned his lesson about Donald Trump. I don't give a rat's behind what Donald Trump says, because one thing Donald Trump always does is the same thing he did with Romney. Romney trashed him ridiculously. What did Donald Trump do after he won? Let me go down. Let me take Mitt Romney out to dinner. Donald Trump doesn't hold grudges. He doesn't care what you think about him. He cares about what you can do to help him achieve whatever goals he has, if he thinks that you're a smart person. He thinks Mitt Romney is a smart person. So he sat down and talked with him. There was speculation that he'd be Secretary of State. That didn't happen, thank goodness. He sat down with a bunch of people. He's gone through a bunch of people. I think you're smart. I think you can help me. If it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, well, fine. Move on. Because that's what a high-level executive does. We try things. If they work, wonderful. If they don't work, or if they stop working, it is time to make a change. That's different than how government does it, which is, well, we just have to say the right thing so that people think we care. Heaven forbid that we actually do anything. He talked about the Investment and Opportunity Act. So let's break this down. You had a bunch of trash to talk about the president, saying his comments were indefensible. I disagree with that entirely. I don't think anything the president said about Charlottesville, based on the facts I was able to uncover about the event, nothing he said was indefensible. Everything he said was simply politically correct but accurate. That being the case, you have your perspective and your belief, because you are a politician and you live in the swamp. That's where you are, Mr. Scott, that, well, these things are indefensible. What was Donald Trump's reaction? Oh, you don't like that? Come on in, sit down, let's talk. You and I don't agree. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? The legislation that he got passed with Donald Trump's support is called the Investment and Opportunities Act, as he mentioned in the video clip, in the audio clip, excuse me. That does three things. Establish opportunity zones, that's what he spoke about, in each state in which investors would be incentivized to deploy capital into new and small businesses. It's going to make it easier for investors to roll existing capital into what they call opportunity funds that could be invested in early stage businesses and encourage long-term investor commitments by eliminating capital gains for certain types of investments. In other words, we're going to do everything we can to make it attractive for you to put your money in places that haven't had a great return up until now. And Donald Trump got behind that legislation. It got passed in this current Congress. Here's the interesting thing. That same bill was around in the last Congress. It was called the Investment in Opportunity Act of 2016. Who was president in 2016? Oh, the so-called black man? This is a good thing for black people. How come the black president didn't do this? How come he didn't get behind it? Why is it that the racist Donald Trump got behind it? See, here's the interesting thing. I can find Barack Obama going out of his way for homosexuals. I can find Barack Obama going out of his way for illegal immigrants. But I cannot find Barack Obama taking one step outside of the Oval Office to cross the street to help a black person. But he, of course, is the one that black people worship. Donald Trump has done nothing against black people. Matter of fact, Donald Trump has forgiven student loans for HBCUs that date back to the Hurricane Katrina era. $322 million of loans that were forgiven by the Trump administration. That could have been forgiven by Barack Obama as well. All the money he spent, and he couldn't find a way to forgive those? Really? But Donald Trump's the racist. The Investment and Opportunity Act, which was there in the last Congress while you were handing out sentence commutations, while you were putting black criminals back into black neighborhoods, while you were making it possible for transgender people to serve in the military contrary to existing regulation, while you were doing everything you could to sit there and push the dreamers and all that, you couldn't find it in your calendar to push investment and opportunity. But Donald Trump not only pushed it, he signed it. And you want me to think Donald Trump's a racist? Please explain to me what Donald Trump has done that is racist. Well, it's the things he says. No, it's not the thing. He called all those countries, fecal voids, or words to that effect. Actually, the only person who to date who is on record calling African nations and Haiti that name is a Democrat named Dick Durbin. He simply said it and told everybody the president said it. Now, I'm not trying to say that Donald Trump didn't say something less than complimentary about the country. He said, yeah, these are terrible places. But the term that Dick Durbin used? Nobody but Dick Durbin has said to date that Donald Trump said that. What has Donald Trump done that is racist? What has he really said? Well, you know, he's against Muslims. Travel ban. You mean the same countries that Barack Obama said we shouldn't take folks from? When Trump says it, he's racist? Really? How does that work? Particularly since there are a whole bunch of other Muslim countries that he didn't say a thing about. So when he does the exact same thing that Obama does, and you didn't call Obama racist, he is. And when he does things that Obama should have done but did not, he's still racist. You got to be kidding me. That is the most ridiculous. This is why when people ask, why are you so hard on black people? Because they're stiff-necked and uncircumcised. This is ridiculous. Donald Trump is a lot of things. He's a terrible husband. If he doesn't want to be with you, he goes and cheats on you, then he divorces you and he marries a person he's cheated with you on. I mean, that's what he does. There's nothing good about that. But racist? No. Never has been racist. Nothing racist about him. You're over here defending Trump. No, I'm not defending Trump. I would do the same thing for anybody. If you're going to say something about someone, bring some proof besides your butt hurt. Butt hurt doesn't prove nothing. Bring some information. Bring some evidence. And also, if you're going to go after Donald Trump, you got to bring your behind because he's going to come for yours. I'm just saying. And I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards, who also does not believe that Donald Trump is a racist, to the best of my knowledge. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. After this, we'll be back with Hour 2.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Certain government officials remind me of an extreme case of tonsillitis. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, your tonsils are an important part of your body's immune system. They battle nonstop against invading germs and viruses that seek to wreak havoc, especially in your throat area. But there are those occasions when the tonsils succumb to extreme battle fatigue and no longer fight to block the microscopic invaders. In fact, sometimes the tonsils must be removed in order to ensure the recovery of the patient because they've joined the other side. Just as corrupted tonsils that no longer protect the body must be removed, some government officials like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and many others no longer even try to properly carry out their duty to protect America from enemies both foreign and domestic. In fact, many elected officials have become so corrupted like bad tonsils, they are now part of the open border debacle that literally endangers the survival of our republic. McConnell and others are more aligned with and loyal to illegal border crossers than we the people who elect them and pay their decent salaries. Thus, like bad tonsils, they too must be removed. I'm Ron Edwards.
Blowing away the myths and revealing the truth. You can continue to blow away the myths with Ron Edwards on Facebook, Twitter, and theronedwards.com. Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Ron Edwards, the new voice of America.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it's made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin on the dominant force of internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Well, you know, I came across some things because I do read, and some things that you come across when you read are just funny. And every so often, white progressives and their Negro pets, especially the pets of color, they'll trot out the Flint water crisis as proof of white racism, white indifference, or even white animosity toward black people. And the thing is, the only word to use for that is revisionist. Why do I say that? If you go back and look at the history of the city of Flint, Michigan, it's been run by Democrats, mostly black Democrats, since the 1980s. If I remember correctly, their last city charter change was in the 80s, either 84 or 87, and that was when they had their last Republican mayor. They have had nothing but Democrat mayors since then. City council members have been overwhelmingly black. They even got to the point in some of the more recent elections of putting people on the city council who were either convicted or being tried for homicide. At least one person was put on the city council who had filed for bankruptcy. Not surprisingly, see, these are the same type of black Democrats in Flint, Michigan that you would find in nearby Detroit, Michigan, and you know what black Democrats did to Detroit, Michigan, the largest municipal bankruptcy in world history. You had the same type of black Democrats in Flint, Michigan, and after 30 years of foolishness, they couldn't balance their books or run their finances either. So just like Detroit needed an emergency manager, Flint needed an emergency manager. So remember this. The only reason certain things were ever done was because the elected officials who were primarily black Democrats in Flint, Michigan, were fiscally incompetent. Period. Some of them in their personal affairs, and all of them when it came to running the city. So, you get to the point where a city that is so poorly run that they have the state come in and try to get it out of trouble. And even after that, because I guess they're trying to be nice guys or whatever, the city council still had some say, maybe not final say, but they had some say in the decisions that would be made regarding how the city would be run. After all, they are the city's, the elected officials, the elected representation of the people of Flint. You can't just ignore them. So here is a little bit of history where, and you really have to look at this to understand. CNN reported it this way. April 16th of 2013, On the city council's recommendation, Andy Dillon, the state treasurer, authorizes Flint to make the switch to Flint River water. Now, the Flint River water that's the problem child. That's where all the contaminants and lead and everything else was, the lead pipes that were leaching, etc. That's where the problem was. The state treasurer had a recommendation from the city council. Now, we're not saying the city council did this all on their own. Not arguing that. Now, Michigan Live ran a story talking about the vote in March 2013. What I read was something in April of 2013. I wonder why they left that out. I always wonder why people leave certain things out. You want to talk about what happened in March, but you don't want to talk about what happened the very next month? Really? How is that? Because on April 16th, regardless of how Michigan Live talks about the March 25th vote, because that's what they want to talk about, which was just a vote to switch water service from the Detroit Water and Sewage Department to the Carriganandi Water Authority, which was in the process of building a pipeline from Lake Huron. Of course, that pipeline wasn't ready. So the idea was to go into the Flint River water supply, which was going to be less expensive than Detroit until the pipeline was done. That was the vote on the 25th. However, on April 16, 2013, eager to save money, the Flint City Council voted 7-1 to join the Carriganandi Water Authority, where a new pipeline project would be delivered, and that ended its contract with Detroit. With the City Council's recommendation, the state treasurer, Andy Dillon, authorized Flint to make the water switch where water begins drawing from the Flint River. Now, if you're going to try and tell me that the council didn't know what it was doing, I would believe that, because they were fiscally incompetent. If you're going to ask me if they should have known, how come they didn't know that the water in the Flint River was such a problem? I don't know. Why didn't they test it? Why didn't they start drawing and then do a test of the water? Why would you make a change to unknown water? Because there was a reason you weren't drawing out of the Flint River in the first place. Why were you not already doing that? You got water from a river named after the city. You're not using that river. There's probably a reason. This always stinks to high heaven to me. And what happens with progressives is the first thing they do is find the whitest and the rightest, right being politically of center. They go out and find the whitest and the rightest person that had anything to do with the screw up and try to hang it on them. Well, that Andy Dillon guy, he was that emergency manager. He was really. So we're going to overlook the 3 decades of mismanagement by the black Democrats who got us into this hole. We're going to overlook the votes that they took to basically sign on to whatever the emergency manager was doing and the recommendations they made that allowed him to do it. And we're going to say that the only people who had anything to do with this was the white governor and whoever he appointed, and overlook the fact that the city council voted 7-1 to join that water authority that didn't even have a pipeline to the place it was going to, and to begin drawing water from the Flint River instead of Detroit so they could save some money. That's the point at which I say BS. Because remember, these are the same class of black Democrats that are in Detroit. Detroit went into bankruptcy following black Democrats. Flint ended up with the same emergency manager situation being run by black Democrats. St. Joseph Parish in Louisiana has a water problem that's worse Nobody even drinks the water, the municipal water such as it is from St. Joseph's, Louisiana. Nobody touches that stuff. Been that way for years. Is a Republican running that? Nah. So how is it that when it comes time to hold people accountable, progressives, particularly black Democrat progressives, always find a way to try to absolve themselves from what either clearly is or clearly should be their responsibility? We just talked about it. Well, Donald Trump's a racist, but Donald Trump does things that actually benefit black people and black organizations and black communities. He does. Now, why is it that he gets criticized as a racist while he does these things, but Barack Obama, who could have done the exact same things that Donald Trump did do and taken those things out of his quiver? He could have put those arrows in his own quiver and shot him. He left him there. But he's for black people. He's an inspiration to black people. I don't think so. Let's remember the Clown Brown Caucus, also known as the Congressional Black Caucus. What have they done in the last 3 decades? Please explain to me, aside from being some of the best dressed public assistance recipients in the country, because when you do nothing for your money from the government, that's exactly what you are, a public assistance recipient. Explain this to me. Where were they when all this was happening? Where were the Michigan representatives? Where was John Conyers, the guy who's now retired for all of his sexual assault, harassment activities. You do know that his district is without representation until the election. Nobody is sitting in his seat. Now, how is it that you get away with that? Oh, that's right, he's a black Democrat in a progressive district, and they already know that they want to have another black progressive Democrat in there, and they don't want to give anybody else a chance to run, and somehow they just decided to leave his seat because they want his son to run for it. But his son has a worse sexual harassment problem than his father. He was actually arrested or handcuffed briefly for trying to choke out his girlfriend. So he's no prize. But he's a black progressive Democrat, and his daddy was one of the longest serving members of Congress in history. But back to Flint. The problem in Flint is not the problem. It's not Rick Snyder's problem. Rick Snyder being the governor. It's not Andy Dillon's problem. The problem is not the emergency manager. They had 2 of them. It's not the emergency manager's problem. The problem in Flint, Michigan are the people who were elected by the people of Flint, Michigan. So if your representatives are a problem and you keep electing the same ones for decades, guess where the problem actually resides? So instead of trying to blame the white man who doesn't live there, why are you letting the black people who live there and keep electing incompetent fools? How are they without responsibility? They're not victims. They are the ones making the decisions as to who's going to be in charge of things. And they kept making horrific choices. Please explain to me, please, how this is anything other than progressivism being faithfully adhered to. When you fail, blame somebody else. Up until you fail, do nothing that is helpful. So you screw things up, and when things are fully screwed up, you go blame the nearest white right of center person. And tell them that the decades of your screw-ups leading into this situation that even caused the situation, They don't matter. It's only the last decision that was made, even though you had input to it. The fact that they made a decision that caused things to seemingly go bad, that's the important thing. If you keep going for that okie doke, you're going to end up with these fools in control of something either this November or November 2020. We've been there, done that, bought the T-shirt, and we finally got out from under that with the 2016 election. Don't go for the okie doke. Progressives are either incompetent or anti-American in their perspective. It's all that simple. They can't govern well because they don't care enough about the welfare of people and their individual rights to govern well, which means you should never let them do it. Do not let them do it. And for everybody who's going to keep out there, and you know who you are, I'm not going to call names on a podcast. You know who you are, black progressive acquaintances and associates of mine who are actively trying to put out a revisionist story about Flint and try to blame the Republicans and ignore 30 years of Democrat ridiculousness and a 7-1 vote by the city council to go along with this scheme that brought Flint River water into the city of Flint to poison the people. I know who you are. And every time you try to do that, as soon as I find out about it, I'm going to call you on it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com. And WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Sad topic, in my opinion, coming up right now. And the best way for me to describe this is we just got some very pointed and horrifying evidence that there are no similarities between the quote-unquote black struggle and the homosexual plight. That evidence, in my opinion, deals with the young ladies, if you will, known as Jennifer and Sarah Hart. These are two lesbians who married and then proceeded to adopt not one, not two, not three, not four, not even 5, but 6 children. All of them would be considered black. You may or may not have heard of what happened recently. Well, let's start with the car crash.
Last week, Jennifer Hart was driving her family's SUV when it went over a California cliff in Mendocino County. Sheriff Tom Allman said Jennifer Hart and spouse Sarah Hart were found wearing seatbelts, but the 3 children found in the vehicle were not. The bodies of Jennifer and Sarah Hart were found on March 26th. The bodies of 3 of their children were found nearby. Allman said, "I'm to the point where I no longer am calling this an accident, I'm calling it a crime." Officials say the Hart's 3 other children who weren't in the vehicle at the time of the crash are missing.
What they're basically saying is that these 2 women got into an SUV with the children and drove off a cliff. What I find interesting is that the women were wearing seatbelts. The children were not. And that led authorities to believe that only 3 of the children were there. But as of the 8th of April, they no longer were of that opinion.
A grim update, meantime, in the investigation into a troubled family's mysterious and fatal SUV crash off a California cliffside involving 2 parents and 6 adoptive children. The Mendocino County Sheriff's Office now says a body was found in the Pacific Ocean surf near the crash site in Westport, California. The body is identified as an African-American female. Still no sign of the Free Hugs boy. That is 15-year-old Devontae Hart, photographed here hugging a Portland police officer during a 2014 protest. This photo was snapped one day after a grand jury in Ferguson, Missouri decided not to indict a white police officer in connection with the shooting death of 17-year-old African-American Michael Brown. Now, investigators are treating this SUV crash that killed at least 5 members of one family as a crime. Parents Jennifer and Sarah Hart were found inside the SUV last month. The bodies of 3 of their adopted children were found on the rocks and in the water.
Gotta love CNN. They just can't pass up an opportunity to talk about the irrelevant. Who gives a rat's behind about Michael Brown? Devontae Hart did something positive, period. Now he's gone. They haven't found him yet. He was the Free Hugs boy at a Portland protest. But back to the whole thing, he's not there at all. But authorities now believe that all 6 children were in the vehicle. What type of parent gets into an SUV, gets into any car, buckles the seatbelts on themselves, but doesn't have the seatbelt buckled for any of the children? Doesn't ask them to do it? Really? Well, that's not going to be surprising when you start getting some of the information. NBC News reported back on the 3rd of April, Hart children may have been abused before the deadly California crash. The Washington women whose SUV accelerated off a California cliff, which is why they no longer think it was an accident. They believe it was standing still and then just accelerated off the cliff. They did a Thelma and Louise with 6 black children aboard. It killed them and at least 3 of the children. Those women were under investigation by authorities concerned that the children may have been abused. And it wasn't the first time such concerns have been raised. Washington State Department of Social and Health Services said it unsuccessfully tried to contact the family of Jennifer Hart and Sarah Hart, both 38, on March 26, which is the same day authorities were alerted to the wreckage of the crash in Mendocino County, California. Nora West, a spokesman for the DSHS in Washington, told NBC News that Child Protective Services has identified the 3 children who were killed, Marcus, 19, Jeremiah, and Abigail, both 14, as potential victims of alleged abuse or neglect. 3 other children, Hannah, 16, Devontae, 15, and Sierra, 12, are presumed dead, but are still the subject of an active search. And as you just heard in the prior clip, one of those bodies has been found. They have said that the crash may have been intentional based on the absence of skid marks and other indicators. If only it stopped there, because the family did not originate, quote unquote, in Washington State or in Oregon. This is very, wow. The Press Democrat, which is a Minnesota publication. Minnesota police report tells of another Hart family abuse allegation. A Minnesota police report obtained Wednesday tells of another abuse allegation made by one of the Hart children 3 years before Sarah Hart pleaded guilty to assaulting one of her 6 adoptive children, and almost 10 years before the family's fatal plunge from a Mendocino coast cliff. An Alexandria, Minnesota police report from September of 2008 says that then 6-year-old Hannah Hart told authorities a bruise on her arm was caused when her mother struck her with a belt. When investigators questioned Jennifer Hart and Sarah Hart about it, they said they didn't know how the bruise could have gotten there, but stated that a few days prior to our interview, Hannah had fallen down 8 stairs in their house. The case was referred to the county's social services department with no indication of police follow-up. In November of 2010, another adoptive daughter, then 6-year-old Abigail, told a teacher that the bruises, or owies, on her abdomen and back appeared after Jen Hart disciplined her by putting her head under cold water, bending her over the bathtub, and hitting her with a closed fist. When questioned about the incident, Sarah took responsibility for the punishment, telling authorities she let her anger get out of control. Let's stop right there, shall we? Here's where we are with this. 2 lesbians got married, but you don't think that's a problem, even though homosexuality, which includes lesbianism, of course, was, as recently as the 1970s, a diagnosable and treatable mental disorder. But it wasn't a problem that they got married. These white lesbians adopt children, so you're going to let somebody who has a mental disorder that you simply choose no longer to recognize adopt children. Would you let schizophrenics adopt children? Oh, you wouldn't. Would you let somebody who has manic depression that is not being monitored or treated in any way, would you have them adopt children? No, but you would let homosexuals who are mentally disturbed and not being treated in any way except the self-medication of homosexuality, you're going to let them have children. Man, you're being hard on homosexuals. I got 6 dead kids here. You're going to let, how many people adopt 6 kids of another race? But you didn't see that as a problem. And they were beating on these kids, but you didn't see that as a problem because nobody took them away. And they went from state to state. They went from Minnesota, they went to Washington, to Oregon, and then they killed them in California. Only adopting children outside their race. Mistreating them. I got problem after problem here. I got lesbians getting married. That's a problem. I got lesbians adopting children. That's a problem. I don't care about what your opinion is. This is a problem. Adopting a very large number of children. That's a problem. Adopting only children outside their race. That's a problem. Abusing these adopted children that are outside their race. That's another problem. And then the worst thing of all, they decide to kill themselves and the children. Children never really had a chance. Didn't even bother to buckle them in the car because they knew they wanted to make sure that they were dead. They buckled themselves in probably to make sure that they didn't have the urge to get out of the car because they wanted their suicide to be complete. But they didn't take care of the children at all. Now, when white progressives and their pets of color decide that they want to see all these similarities and parallels between the black struggle and the homosexual plight, I want you to think about these 6 dead kids. I don't care about the dead homosexual women. I do not. They chose their lifestyle. They chose each other. They did and at any point in time, either of these women could have made different choices. But they chose their own perversion. They chose to consummate that perversion. And then they chose to bring 6 black children into their perversion. And black children have their own little struggle. I'm not signing off on all the white privilege foolishness. But growing up black is a bit of a struggle. Of course, growing up white is a bit of a struggle. Growing up with someone as a parent who neither understands what your racial and ethnic influences are or necessarily should be, and they ain't even got the sense to know that they need somebody of the opposite gender to help them raise children, you're giving these kids no shot at normalcy. None. But you want to say it's a civil rights. It's not a civil rights issue. You want to talk about, everyone wants to talk about mental health. Why are you not getting mental health for homosexuals? Well, they're fine. Really? I got 6 dead kids here. Well, that could have happened with anybody. Well, it didn't. It happened with these. Well, you're singling them out. No, you don't understand. If I got heterosexual people doing this, I may be dealing with some serious problems. But this whole thing started with a serious problem. Homosexuality is a disorder. You just don't want to call it that anymore. It's not a civil rights issue. It's a disorder. It's something that should be treated. It's not like skin tone. Skin tone does not cause perversion. It does not cause mental acting out. It doesn't do any of that. But homosexuality causes problems. And you, whoever the idiots are who put children with these people and are still doing it, trying to say how it's a loving family. No, you want to expose children to that which is not even a situation where they could have naturally come about, and then tell them that that's normal. No. And if you know the LGBT community and whatever other alphabet that goes with that, they have higher rates of suicide than heterosexuals. Why are you surprised? Why should you be surprised? And I know people are going to try to minimize this by saying it had nothing to do with their lesbianism. You can't prove that. Well, you can't prove it does. I already know that it's a mental illness. And I know that they sat there and put themselves in stressful situations. You're not supposed to be married to a woman if you're a woman. That's stressful. Raising your own children is stressful. Bringing in 6 children that aren't yours because you can't have children, that's stressful. They already showed they couldn't handle the stress 2 states back. But nobody thought to take the children away. Nobody protected black children from lesbianism. Nobody in 3 states protected them. Well, we got allegations, but you just never got around to protecting them. Now they're dead. You don't have to worry about them anymore. The next time, and every time, that some homosexual tries to tell me that they understand my pain, I'm going to ask them the last time a black couple adopted 6 homosexual children and drove off a cliff to kill everybody. I want them to tell me when that was, since there are so many similarities and parallels between the black struggle and the homosexual plight. Let me know when there was a black married couple who adopted 6 homosexual children, piled them on into an SUV or a station wagon or whatever, and decided to kill everybody. If you can't find me an example of that, miss me with the comparison. Save it for somebody who's trying to hear it, because I'm not. I have no problem calling out homosexuality for what it is. It is wrong. And you should. I'm not saying, you know what, whoever wants to choose that, you choose it. But don't you dare bring anybody else into it who doesn't have a choice. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 FM, North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. We have this wonderful phenomenon going on right now where the black privileged are complaining about white privilege. They don't even know what it is. If you ask 4 black people what white privilege is, aside from saying racism, you'll probably get 5 answers from 4 different black people. It's a boogeyman term. It means whatever you want it to mean as an excuse for black people failing. What are you trying to say? Black people fail? Let me help you out. When you are the most criminal segment of the U.S. population, when you are the least married segment of the U.S. population, when you are the most bastard-producing segment of the U.S. population, when you are the most imprisoned by per capita segment of the U.S. population, when you are the most sexually transmitted disease infected segment of the U.S. population, when you are the most abortive segment of the U.S. population, you're failing. And no matter how you slice it, that's where blacks are. And whites have nothing to do with that. White people are not going into black communities and committing so much crime that burglar bars need to appear. That's not what's happening. White men are not going after black women to the point where, while white men have maybe a 16% rate of herpes infection, black women have a 48.8% rate of herpes infection, genital herpes, which you cannot get rid of. 77.3% bastard baby rate, that's not caused by white people, because most of those children are not fathered by whites. They have their own issues, but it's not that number. Drug use, well, we got opioids now. Okay, well, guess what? If you got rid of all the opioids, you would still have a drug problem that is devastating and continues to devastate the black community. It's an excuse. White privilege is nothing. Now, there was a time when it was. In my lifetime, you still had Jim Crow laws that were phasing out, which basically said, hey, a white person is superior legally to a black person. And if you go back before that, of course, you're going to run into chattel slavery. Chattel slavery didn't just influence African Americans. They weren't the only ones who were slaves, but I digress. But in my lifetime, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist. I'm saying it doesn't matter. Racism's not holding anyone back. Racism is not the cause for anyone to fail. Ignorance is a bigger cause of failure. Why do you say that? Because I can find real black people who come here from Africa, don't necessarily know how to even speak the language that well, and they are lapping people in this country who are considered black, who were born here, in accomplishments and material success. If skin color was the issue, then nobody from the continent of Africa should be able to come here and be successful, yet they do. So, we have two classes here that are responsible for this latest push of white privilege being the go-to excuse for black failure. You have the political class, made up of elected officials and civic leaders. They're basically leeches. There's no other way to put it. They're leeches. They latch on to the host community, black communities. Look at all the black communities that are out there which are represented by black elected officials. Let's start with the Congressional Black Caucus, whom I call the Clown Brown Caucus. What have they done in the last 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years? When is the last time that a bill that was introduced by a member of the Clown Brown Caucus was debated or even voted on in the House of Representatives? Now, I do know that most recently they managed to get an impeachment vote dealing with Donald Trump, and they couldn't even get a majority of the Democrat Party to go with that. So what is it that they have done? What have they accomplished legislatively to benefit the people they say they represent? Nothing. If you want to go down to the municipality level, the state level, the city level, Detroit was run by black folks for most of the 40 years leading up to its bankruptcy. Flint, Michigan, the water crisis people were run by blacks for the 30 years leading up to their water debacle. Well, they didn't cause that. Yeah, they did. When you run your city so poorly that somebody who doesn't know anything about your city has to come in and run it, guess what? Mistakes are going to get made, and they're going to be bad. And don't forget, the city council of Flint voted 7-1 to allow that switch over to Flint River water. Didn't they know how bad the Flint River? It's named after the city. Never mind. And then there's the civic leaders like the NAACP, the National Association of African Complaint Personnel. What have they accomplished? What have they done? Tell me how they have moved the needle on the problems that are in the black community. I don't want to hear about, well, we got white folks to pay this money. Did that reduce the out of wedlock birth rate? Did it? Did it reduce the amount or percentage of drug use? Did it keep one black person from getting shot in Detroit, in St. Louis, in Baltimore, in Chicago, in Birmingham, in Miami, in Boston, in Los Angeles? Did it do any of that? The answer is no. But they are respected by black people for reasons I do not understand. I don't respect them, but I imagine that's pretty obvious. But they have basic responsibilities, I would believe, toward leadership in resolving issues in the black community. And I'm going to throw the black church, the black clergy in there as well, as being a political class that has failed in basic responsibilities, because by and large, the black church does not lead on moral issues. And the problems in the black community are failures of morality and ethics. Where's the church? So, what are they giving in return for these positions of respect and authority they have? Elected leaders, civic leaders, clergy. What are they giving in return? Because the black community is suffering. It's going downhill. Now that's the political class. There's another class. Because you have to have people who are really out there that are going to draw attention, and that's not really going to be necessarily elected officials, except because they really don't want the limelight except at election time. When you're not doing anything as an elected official, you just want to stay out of the way until it's time to go campaign. However, there are other wealthy but not very accomplished people who are doing some interesting work, and that's what I call the minstrel class of blacks. What do I mean by minstrel class? I'm talking about entertainers and athletes. We're talking about people who have money because they have talent, but they're not very bright. They don't have a lot of substance to them. Nevertheless, they're influential. Let me give you an example. This is Jay-Z talking about white privilege with David Letterman on his Netflix show.
I'll be honest with you. I've here lately grown, I'm beginning to lose confidence in the Trump administration. I don't know. What is it? Yeah, what do you think of that?
I think it's actually a great thing. And here's why. I think that what he's forcing people to do is have a conversation and people to band together and work together. And, like, you can't really address something that's not revealed. He's bringing out an ugly side of America that we wanted to believe was gone. And it's still here. And we still got to deal with it. And we have to have the conversation. We have to have tough conversation. We have to talk about the N-word. And we have to talk about why white men are so privileged in this country.
I completely agree. We don't need any more evidence. I mean, is he a racist? Is he not a racist? I'm telling you, you're having a debate over whether a guy is a racist. Chances are that guy's a racist.
First thing I take from that is how slow Jay-Z is. David Letterman opened that segment with a joke that the audience immediately got onto. And it took 3 or 4 seconds, it seemed like, for Jay-Z to understand something funny had been said. And then one of the richest people in America, black or white, and he didn't get there by producing anything. Well, he made music. You're not hearing me. He didn't make his money by producing or building anything. But he wants to talk about how other people are privileged? I'm not hearing that. Not a very bright man. Here's someone else who's very influential, at least not as influential as Jay-Z. There was a time when he was probably more influential. But here's Danny Glover talking about racism in America to CBS News, I believe it is.
I think celebrating King at this moment and his words is there's nothing better that we can do, not only here in this community, around this nation, but also around the world as well.
You mentioned extreme materialism, racism, and militarism. Do you believe those are endemic in the American culture?
Well, they certainly are. I mean, we talk about we talk about the first two, militarism, and we talk about the racism. Racism is the foundation of this country, without a doubt about it. The foundation of this country is based upon that.
And when you say foundation, what do you mean?
Well, but basically, since this experiment, the experiment began with, first of all, with the settlement of this country, and with the settlement of this country, the massacre or against Native First Nation people. That's the first thing. And then certainly, as a country evolved and it developed
with the institution of slavery.
With the institution of slavery, everyone knows that slavery was the first engine for the Industrial Revolution. Cotton was. I mean, that's certainly been documented for at least the last few years about the importance of cotton in this country's development. This country was a minor colony within the whole British system until at the turn of the 19th century, the British industrialists invented a machine that spin cotton into thread and to material faster than ever imaginable by human hands. And out of that was slavery. And we can chart the growth of this country, the wealth of this country is built around slavery. So you have what Dr. Reverend James Lawson referred to yesterday as a plantation capitalism. That's what it was built on. Capitalism in this country is built on that. And the second part of the Industrial Revolution, as we also know, goes with steam and also fossil fuel. That's the second part. So there's no doubt about that. So racism is endemic in that. And imagine the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise, 1822, is based on due process. That white people have a right to own a slave, like they have a right to own a cow, like they have a right to own a pig, or a right to own anything. So you imagine how people are seen from that vantage point as simply possessions. The whole psychology is that. One of the reasons why we cannot deal with it and have not dealt with the issue of race because we have not given up the psychology around that.
There is so much. That man needs to retire. He's not very bright. I don't know if he ever was very bright, but I'm not saying he's not a good actor. But all an actor has to do is memorize lines and express emotions. He doesn't have to be smart. The foundation of the country is racism, malarkey. The foundation of the country is the idea of living apart from government and living at liberty. But what about the slaves? What about it? What about the racism? What about it? You do know in the 18th century in America of the 18th century, blacks were not the only slaves. The idea that cotton was the basis of the American economy, please explain to me how that works when you wipe out the Confederate States where most of the cotton production was going on. How much cotton what was the effect of the Civil War, particularly the fact that the Confederate States lost the Civil War? What do you think that did to cotton production? So there's the myth that the black man built the United States. Everything that they built, which was built probably in the South, the primary building of the country, as he wanted to say, was wiped out when Sherman marched from where he began all the way to the sea. But we have these impassioned people with a lot of money and popularity saying things, and that's supposed to matter. What I don't know is why. You got to deal with some of this stuff. I mean, for example, there's another clip out there, I'm not going to play it, where Samuel L. Jackson basically defends white people, one white person. And you know, Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most militant actors in Hollywood, calling folks racist and everything else. But he says Quentin Tarantino can't be racist. And there's a real simple reason for that, because Quentin Tarantino got him paid. So he can't be racist. Anybody who's feeding me can't be a racist. I get it. I don't agree with it. But that's the whole point of this thing. Well, you know, white people are bad, except my white guy. My white guy is not like that. Even though he's the one that put Django out there and created the Steven character that people use as a meme for what they call the Uncle Tom and Sellout Black. But he can't be racist. Seriously? Look, black people have problems. White people didn't cause them. Black people have problems. White people will not solve them. But black people have a menstrual class and a political class that benefits from the problems that black people have. And until you put them in their place, nothing else is going to change. And that's our show. God bless you. God keep you. And until next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.